Erica talks K-dramas, C-dramas, T-dramas, HK-dramas. Erica talks K-dramas, J-dramas, Turkish dramas, Thai dramas. Do. Erica talks Egyptian dramas, Indian dramas, telenovelas, but mostly K-dramas. Hello, everyone. So today we have another sort of hodgepodge episode. I'm going to talk about a short drama that I watched and also three movies, mostly two movies, but I thought since I saw them all on the same day, I'll talk about the third one too. And in a very unusual coincidence, all of these titles that I'm talking about today were actually released in 2025. So I think that's the first time that's ever happened. Well, no, that happened at the first episode. Well, no, because they talked about an older drama. So yeah, no. So this is the only one where everything takes place in this, or was released in the same year. So let's start out with the movies. I a couple weeks ago wanted to see The Ugly, which is a Korean movie. It premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, which I did not attend, but it was released very shortly afterwards in the US. And so I went to go see it because that movie theater that shows the Korean films is about an hour away, and I had traffic issues. I actually got there so late that I could no longer buy a ticket for that movie for that afternoon showing, which, if you've been attending movies in the United States, you know these movies usually start about 20 minutes late. So it's it's kind of funny. Anyway, so I didn't want to drive home and then drive back, and I knew I would most likely only get the one weekend chance to see the movie. So I decided to stay there and see a couple other movies while I waited for The Ugly to show in the evening. So I ended up seeing The Long Walk, which is the Stephen King movie that was released recently. And I also saw this movie called The Adventure, which is Chinese. And that one was a surprise. I had heard nothing about it, and all I knew was it was a comedy involving time travel, and I freaking loved that movie. So we're going to talk about that one. And then I finally did see The Ugly as I planned, and I enjoyed it very much. I was a bit frustrated by a lot of the reviews that I read of it. So we'll talk about that. And as usual, it's going to be completely spoilery. I could be talking about the endings or all the details in between. And there is, let's see, is there in this one? No, I don't think there's anything in here that really, I mean, there's murder, but and some violence. There's a lot of violence in these things, but just the normal things. So I don't think any trigger warnings really, unless you don't like seeing any violence. But it is going to be spoilery. And then the drama that I'm going to talk about is called A Stormy Marriage. I think it could also be called Stormy Marriage Life, but in its release, it's called A Stormy Marriage. And it's a newer sort of form of drama, a short drama. And these have popped up. They're filmed so that you can watch them easily on your phone. So it's in vertical style. So they're sometimes called vertical dramas. And the episodes are about, I would say, 30 seconds to a minute long. And there's usually around 100 episodes, I think, from what little I've seen. And this one didn't have any credits on it, and it was very difficult to find information about it. So I will tell you everything I know about it, and maybe you can check it out. I'm not so sure about this sort of drama. I mean, it's like having a piece of candy between meals, but I do enjoy the longer dramas and the daily dramas, which are wild. But it was a nice kind of break from the other types of things that I usually see. So I didn't write down too many details about the long walk because I'm not really intending to concentrate on that too much. It was based on a Richard Bachman, which was a pseudonym or is a pseudonym for Stephen King. And I think it was a novella. I don't know. I had hoped that I owned it. I don't actually own it. I own some other Richard Bachman thing. But it's basically a story where it's a dystopian version of the United States, and they choose a boy from every state to compete. And it starts off this time in Maine, which of course is normal because it's a Stephen King story. And they walk until there's only one walker left. And it's kind of everything looks kind of Depression era, very run down, very old. And you have the kind of standard Stephen King type of characters, like, I don't know how to describe it. You got the main character that's, a white kid and very standard, and then he makes friends with this black kid who's kind of funny, and there'll be another black kid who's more serious. There's a kind of goofy boy. And it's really, they're all very young. I think they're all teenagers. But you do find out along the way that one of them was married. The one that you would not have suspected was married. And so they have to walk. They've got these tanks following them, and it's all being televised. And the one thing that I found really hard to believe was that they don't get any sort of break for going to the bathroom. And if you pause for too long, and it seemed to me like maybe it was just because of the time for the movie. I don't know. Maybe I should read the actual original story. But it just felt like they gave them their warnings and ended up killing the contestants a lot faster than was necessary. Like they didn't get any sort of break. And I understand, like, they're walking to death. So really, they don't want them to stop to eat or anything. But really, you're not going to let them stop to go to the bathroom? It's just kind of weird. I don't know. I it was funny because there's this, I think he's a general who is kind of in charge of this. They all hate him. And I was like, there's something familiar about this guy. I didn't know it was Mark Hamill. And so it's very, I mean, of course, if you've seen something like Hunger Games, it's kind of the same sort of theme, except it's more directly the United States. And it rings very, very true. I know there are a lot of problems with adapting Stephen King books and novels, well, they're all, and short stories and that sort of thing, into TV and movies. But this was a really good adaptation, and I would highly recommend it. So it's not very uplifting. It actually had a surprising ending. I did not expect it to end exactly the way that it did. But I think that also rang true. And I don't know how the story ends in the actual novel. So again, something to read, but I have like 7 or 8 ebooks that I have on the go right now, plus a couple physical novels that I'm trying to read, and I read them in little bursts. So who even knows when I would get around to the long walk. So that was the first movie that I saw. The second movie I saw was the Chinese movie. It was called The Adventure, and it was directed by Ma Duo. The cast was kind of not big, but pretty good sized. I had a little bit of trouble. I didn't check my drama list, which might have had a better cast list. So I wasn't able to attach actor and actresses' names to their characters. So I only got it for the main character, who is named Huang Yuqi. And as an adult, he was played by Jia Bing. As a teenager, he was played by Wang Hao. And so the story of this one is that this man, Yuchi, is middle aged. I think he says he's 43. Yeah, I think and he's married and they have a son. And he just has like this daily routine. He's just going through life and not enjoying it. He's really beat down by life. He works at a company run by, you learn, somebody he was friends with as a teenager, and he's always getting to work late. He does all these things, he doesn't just do his job. He does like all this extra stuff like fixing things up and keeping things going. And he's just really unhappy. And his wife, I can't remember if we find out what she does for a living. It might even be part of the story. But his wife is there. It's so funny because she has like crazy hair, crazy curly, all over the place hair. And then their son, who completely doesn't care about him, doesn't care about the efforts he makes for him or anything. And so Yuchi is not very happy. Well, there happens to be a meteor shower, and there's a bridge in their town. And so he happens to go on the bridge during the meteor shower, and he's on his bike, I think. I think they were both on their bikes. And so as the meteor shower happens, he's going one way on the bike across the bridge, and his 18-year-old self is coming the opposite way on his bike. And they run into each other. Somehow, because of this meteor shower, it makes the walls between different time periods thin, and they run into each other and they end up switching bodies. So adult Yuchi is in his teenage body, and teenage Yuchi is in the adult body, and they have to learn how to deal with everything. Of course, the adult Yuchi kind of has an advantage because he remembers how things were as a teenager. And they actually find a way to communicate through a chat program. And that was kind of cool. I remember in Reply 1994, the Korean drama, where you got to see some of the stuff that they actually had in the 90s, like these games and the way the computers were for them, which was pretty much the same as they were for in the US at the time, but it's kind of cool to see the differences. And so it was cool to see this messaging program that I'd never heard of, and they were able to communicate through it. And he had to, the teenage Yuchi had to find the computer like away in some closet or something and kind of get it running and everything. And it's pretty amazing that he still had the same program all those years later. So they kind of give each other hints. Teenage Yuchi is like, why is your life like this? And adult Yuchi is like, man, I had all these things that I thought were going to be great. And how did my life turn out the way it did? And so they try to change things. So what you find out is his mother had died and his father had given his all. He was running a restaurant. And so adult Yuchi comes up with all these plans because he works in, I don't know exactly what their company did when he was an adult, kind of marketing or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so he has this idea to make his father's restaurant really popular and then to have, a whole chain of them and that sort of thing. And he's really thinking this is going to be great for his father. Teenage Yuchi remembered because he had just come from that time period. He remembered his father's hopes and dreams and everything. And so I think he was the one who ends up going to visit the father. And you find out it's really sad. His father has dementia. He's living in a nursing home and it's just sad. And that's just one of the things. And then you see them as teenagers, and I don't know, he has this group of friends, and then you begin to slowly realize who they are in the present day, 25 years later. And it's very interesting. Of course, the details have faded. This is one I would absolutely want on DVD to watch again because this was so funny and I really related to it. And what I loved, and this was something, Field of Dreams, if you've ever seen that movie. What I loved about that movie, even when I was little, was that he had these crazy schemes, he had all these ideas, and his wife was in it with him. And it's not just she blindly believed him or anything. She would kind of challenge him, but she was in it with him. And so they worked together to do this. And so Yuchi and his wife and his younger self, and it's a little bit tricky because it turns out that not all of his friends were really his friends, worked together to stop some stuff that happened that he hadn't even really fully realized had happened the way it had. And they were changing that so they could change the future and make it better. And as they were doing these things, they were causing some changes that did not make things to be better. And so they had to like keep negotiating with each other through the time period and working to fix it. And then it was just this great adventure story, very funny. And then they do end up, I think the meteor shower was happening again. And so they were able to switch bodies back. And then at the very end, adult Yuchi meets the, I think, 25 years in the future again, Yuchi, and he said some stuff. And I'm like, "Huh." And it could actually lead to a sequel, I think, but I don't think it was really meant to. I think it was just kind of to tease you about there's more stuff that he doesn't know, but and I loved it. Um, and it was really fun. And all of a sudden, that movie theater that shows the Korean movies is now showing Chinese movies. And I'm like, that's fine, but I can't get very much information about these things the way I can the Korean movies. So I'm kind of like, I don't know about driving a whole hour and risking not enjoying it. So maybe if it coincides with a Korean movie, then I'll go see both, but we'll see. So that was The Adventure. And the the Ugly, which was the Korean movie that I actually went to see. The Korean title is Olgul, which literally means face. And it is based on a 2018 graphic novel by Yoon Sang-ho, and he was also the writer and director for the movie. So it's the same person's vision for this story. And it starts out, you're seeing this elderly master engraver who happens to be blind, and his name is Im Young-gu. And you see his son there. His son is Im Dong-hwan. And so the old man, Young-gu, is played by Kwan Hae-hyo, and Dong-hwan is played by Park Jung-min. And then you do have flashbacks to when the engraver was a young man, and he is also played by Park Jung-min. So Park Jung-min had a double role. And so there's this reporter who's very go get 'em, and she's interviewing Young-gu. And then she tries to ask about his wife who had died because, he's blind and he had to raise his son alone. And that's very difficult. And that's a story that I think would be interesting to people around the world. And he kind of shuts down at that point. Like he has to go take a break. And Dong Hwan is encouraging him to answer the woman's questions because this could be good for their business. They're doing okay, but it would be even better if they could bring in more customers and get more attention. And the father's not really wanting to cooperate. And Dong Hwan overhears the reporter talking on the phone to somebody. So he realizes she's not really as nice as she's pretending to be. She has like this whole thing. She, as it turns out, wants to look into what happened to the mother. And so it just turns out, while this is going on, they find the remains of somebody who's been buried for, I think it's 40 years. And they discover that it is the mother. And one of the things that's kind of shocking is there are no photos or anything of this woman. And the mother's name is Jung Young-hee. And you'll see in the movie, Shin Hyun-bin provides her voice, and I believe Shin Hyun-bin is actually acting, but you never see her face. And surprise, surprise, at the end, when you do see a photograph that they eventually find somewhere, we'll get into that whole story. It's a modified picture. It's not actually Shin Hyun-bin's face. So some of the reviews were like, you instantly know exactly what happened. Is like, I didn't know. Like, I watched tons of Korean movies. I never assume anything. So I did not know what the whole thing would end up being. So they discover her body. they have no photographic evidence of her. And so the reporter is very interested in finding out more about this woman. And so she tracks down some people who used to work at the factory because Youngie used to work at this kind of textile factory where they made clothing. And I think it's 3 people in that first instance. And these people are horrible. But the things they were saying, I was like, that's how people are. And they don't even realize how horrible they are. And I know this includes me. Like, I've said things in the past and then I'm like, whoa, why did I say that? And I don't know if they had any level of self-reflection. So, one review I saw made some reference to Korean beauty standards, etc. I don't even think, I mean, yes, that's part of a role in any Korean story, I would suppose, at some level, but I don't think that's really at play here. I think it's more that people will kind of pile on. And you can see from the environment in this factory, from all the flashbacks, it was not a good environment. It was very hard work. You were under threat. So if you made the owner angry, he could fire you. He could try to make sure that you didn't get hired anywhere else. You could be beaten, all kinds of stuff. And it's just so I think there's an element where people will kind of bully somebody else to try to make sure that they aren't bullied. It doesn't always save them, but they do that. And I think it was also people tend to kind of pile on this person that they see as less than themselves. I've seen that in schools, I've seen that at work. It happens. And so these 3 people, they just say stuff and they aren't aware that Youngie's son is sitting right in front of them and they're saying all this stuff about her, about how she smelled, how she was dirty, it, just saying all these horrible things. And it was like, what the heck? So then they end up tracking down the seamstress that Youngie was an assistant to. And what they find out from the seamstress was that the seamstress was raped by the manager of the factory. And Youngie came across her crying after it happened. And she, even though she was already one of the lowliest in the factory, she wanted to do what was right. And so she tried to stand up for the seamstress. And she started making flyers and talking about what a horrible person the manager was. And so you can see that she's writing in the dark very carefully. And her husband is like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm not doing anything. So she doesn't want to involve her husband. She's, just doing that. And they have at the time their son was a baby, an infant. And so she's very shy and unassuming. And the seamstress is the only one who had any real sympathy. She's like, I treated her horribly. And she even in her interview says some things that aren't so nice about Youngie. But she does admit she was not nice and she felt bad. And she was very mean to Youngie because Youngie didn't understand when somebody hears about a rape, they're actually going to try to find the victim and find out who that is and talk bad about them. And yeah, I mean, that is true, but that didn't seem. It was interesting because I don't think that was really why she got so angry at Youngie afterwards. But that is the way she explained it. And I think that, again, is a perfect expression of how humans are. And So then they're still trying to find information. The father won't talk about it really. And the reporter keeps poking. And then they eventually track down the manager of the factory. And he is horrible. He's living in this rundown, one of those old apartments or houses that uh, I think get bulldozed, like entire neighborhoods will get bulldozed of those old fashioned houses to make way for newer apartment buildings and that sort of thing. And so he's in one of those places, and his walls are covered with all these photos that he had taken because he was taking advantage of his female workers, and he kept all these pictures of them in different levels of undress. He also had, like, he would take their picture for their, not application, but their employee record. And so he had all those. And he did have Youngi's picture, and that's eventually the picture that is given to the son at the very end. And this guy is absolutely disgusting. I mean, he is bedridden, but he doesn't even have a bed. He's on the floor. And he is still just one of the most awful people you can ever imagine. He's just horrible. And so the sun storms out, and the reporter does stay to get the photograph. And it's becoming apparent through this information that they're finding that the father, the master engraver, is somehow not telling them everything. And you see through the flashbacks, they had this kind of romance. She was brave enough to kind of not make moves, but she would bring him little pieces, bits of food and that sort of thing. She would talk to him every day. And so this romance blossomed, and the other merchants in the street, they were all in the alleyway by the factory. And so that's why she would see him every day. And they kept talking to him about how pretty she was and everything and blah, blah, blah. And so he's like, oh. So he ended up asking her to marry him because I think they even encourage him to do that. And then after Youngie causes trouble at the factory, the manager invites him over, and I think some of those merchants were there too. Maybe not. I mean, it was just some of his friends. Anyway, it was not a very nice atmosphere, but he couldn't see everything, so. And the manager basically reveals she's not pretty, she's ugly, and you better get her under control. And, basically threatening him, but pretending to be friendly. And so the master engraver goes home, and, bit by bit, this all comes out through the movie, and then you see the full thing. And he was furious with her and ended up killing her. She had already been beaten up by some of the men from the factory managers clique, and the master engraver ended up finishing the job and dragged her out and dumped her in the woods, and then the men ended up burying her, and he had no idea that they were there because they stayed quiet when they saw that he was out there dumping her body. So they just buried her in a shallow grave, and she was eventually found. And so the one thing that the engraver couldn't figure out is who buried her because he didn't do that. It was very, and it, so some of the reviews were like, well, when you see her picture, she's not ugly at all. And it's like, no, she wasn't ever really pretty, but she wasn't as horrible as they were describing. They were describing her like a monster, just unbelievable. But again, I think that is something that we do. Like, somebody will tell some story and people will just kind of like glam on and even say the same thing, and kind of it snowballs into this huge comment, and it's not really representative of what something really is or someone is really. But just kind of. But I think with these people who are criticizing the movie, they're too focused on her actual face. That's not it. You think that they have this beautiful little romance, this sweet romance, where they meet as equals, they love each other. It's really amazing, two very poor people who find love and start a new life together, and they have a son. But no, he didn't really love her. He saw her as one of his possessions. And when it turned out that she wasn't behaving as he wanted, that she wasn't what he had believed she was, he killed her. Even though he would have to raise that baby alone. And I don't think he really had any help. I don't think either of them had any family. You find out about, oh, that was the first set of people I think that you encounter before the coworkers at the factory. So you find out about her growing up, and her family was very, very rich. And they claim that she ran off, but really they drove her out. And her family was just horrible. Like, that was just one part of the horribleness. And then you meet her coworkers and you're like, holy cow. Um, and I think it all comes together in how people just kind of will make a comment about something. It could be about a movie, it could be about a book or TV show or whatever. And sometimes it's about people, like I said before, and they'll just make a comment, and it's not really, because they're not making the comments based on what they've seen themselves. They're really just repeating what somebody else did. Even if they've seen this thing, they're just kind of, going with the flow and building up on it. And she was a good person. She was brave. She was so much better than anybody else, no matter how they treated her. And they made fun of her for being weak, but she was a lot stronger than any of them were. But what she couldn't do was withstand the beating from several men. And then the man who was supposed to love her and treasure her for the rest of her life turned on her and killed her. And so I was very moved by this movie, and I think it really speaks to how humanity really is. And amazing acting jobs. I just loved it. This too, I wouldn't mind having on DVD, but for different reasons from the adventure. So it was a really good movie, and I highly recommend it. So that was The Ugly. Oh, and did I mention? Yeah, I think I mentioned that Jung Hee is played by Shin Hyun Bin. Yes. So I think we'll be talking about Tell Me That You Love Me in an upcoming episode. I think I'm finally at a place where I can talk about that K-drama at length and give it the appreciation that it deserves, because that is a really good K-drama. Somebody on one of the K-drama subreddits talked about how much they loved it, and somebody else piped in, and that, it made me feel good, because that really is one of my top favorite K-dramas. And so, yeah, we're going to take a look at that. So that was, I think, Shin Hyun Bin's probably best role from my perspective. There's that. And then now we will get to A Stormy Marriage, the vertical drama that I watched. So it was funny because all of a sudden I started getting these ads for this app called Drama Box. And I guess it's run by a Singaporean company, and they focus on these vertical or short dramas. So this one just happens to be a Korean one. I think most of the vertical dramas are Chinese. iQIYI, which is another app that I sometimes use, they've started getting short dramas. And so to kind of broaden my perspective, after I watched A Stormy Marriage, I started watching a Chinese short drama on iQIYI. Of course, there's a lock after 9 episodes, so I've seen about 9 minutes of it. But it's interesting because in iQIYI, they don't rename them. They use their Chinese names, they use Chinese locations. Again, there's no credits, but it's the same sort of thing. Whereas I think all of the dramas on Drama Box, you have the audio, the original audio. So for this one, A Stormy Marriage, you have the Korean audio, but the subtitles give them Western names, which are kind of close to the Korean names, but not close enough. So it was a little bit confusing because you've got them saying one thing and you're reading another, and it's like, what? And they'll even rename the places in there to make them sound Western. And it's like, I don't like that aspect at all. I also, because I downloaded Drama Box, and I didn't like how it was trying to get me to like log in to get points and do this to get points. It's just like, no. So I uninstalled it. I didn't even watch it on there. I ended up watching it on YouTube. So you can watch the full dramas. People have put together all the episodes. So it ends up being, I think it's 2 hours and 26 minutes or something for all the episodes. So I don't think it's exactly a minute long for each episode, but whatever. There was very little information I could find out about this. The reason I noticed this, and the reason why a lot of other people, because I found people commenting on it, Lee Sang-yeob, who's a kind of prominent Korean actor, he is in this short drama. And so he was featured in the commercials, and everybody's like, what's this? But you can't find very much information about it. So it's like, what? Anyway, his character's name is Kim Hyunwoo, but in the Western names, he's called Henry Wood. And his co-star, his love interest, is played by John Sara, and her character's name is So Jian, but the Western name is Anna Kurt. And it was directed by Lee Chang-woo, who also directed some K-dramas like Hyena, which I haven't seen, but it's on my watch list, and some other stuff. And I think he's done a couple other short dramas before this, so he's experienced in it. I enjoyed the heck out of this thing. So Anna Kurt, or Jian, is this daughter of this extremely wealthy family, and the westernized name is the Sevilla Group. It's their company, and she's kept her face hidden. She went off to study architecture and possibly engineering too. I'm not sure. And she's come back. She had been married for 3 years to some guy who I think his Western name was Zahn. His last name is Zahn. So he's called Mr. Zahn. And so she's come to the courthouse to celebrate where they had met 3 years before, where their romance had started and everything. So Henry Wood shows up, and he's there, I guess, for a blind date. And he thinks she's the date. So there's this whole kind of confusing conversation. And so they're both kind of like, what's going on? So he backs off because she tells him, I'm married. And then her husband shows up. Well, her husband shows up with a woman and dumps Anna on site because he has this new woman, and Anna's so poor and everything. She had kept her identity secret from her husband for 3 years. I thought that was hilarious. And he, I think, thought of her as a construction worker. What kind of job is that for a woman? That sort of thing. And she's so poor and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, eh. And just like in, what was it, A Moment to Remember, it's like people are looking down on these things. It's like, these are good jobs. I mean, in the United States, you make good money doing construction. Yeah, it's hard work, but there's nothing to be ashamed of in working in construction. So, anyway, but she's not even at the level that they think. She's like way above where they realize. So, she's dumped. And then Henry Wood kind of steps in, and he gets her to agree to marry him that day. So the whole deal is his family is pressuring him to marry somebody, some high up woman. Wait for it. And so he wants to just marry her, have a marriage of convenience so that he can get his family off his back. So because she's been served her divorce papers by her current husband, Mr. Zahn, she goes ahead and agrees to the contract marriage with Henry Wood. And it's so funny because Henry and Anna do not believe each other when they try to tell each other who they really are. They think that they're making up. They're like, you don't have to tell me all this stuff. And it's like, but it's true. And so Mr. Zahn and his new woman go off, and they're all, going to all these events and everything. And so they go to some like cocktail party, and there's these couple people, like obviously they don't have a lot of money for these dramas, so there's these characters that appear in all these different locations, and they're just standing around gossiping about everything and have nothing else to say. And they're drinking, I think it's all supposed to be wine, but some of it's like bright blue, there's bright yellow. It's hilarious. And so they come to this cocktail hour, all of them, and it's supposed to be the presentation of the mysterious daughter of the Kurt family who run this stevia company. And Anna shows up, and nobody's believing. Her ex-husband doesn't believe her. His new girl, I don't remember if they got married. I don't think they did. I'm not sure. It doesn't even matter. And then Henry Wood shows up, and she's not believing who he is, and he's not believing who she is. But then it becomes apparent that she is the daughter of the family, but they still don't fully believe her. And the people who could really confirm who were her parents are like never seen. They're never there. So there's all this stuff at that cocktail hour thing. Then Anna is at a construction site doing work with the head builder or whatever. I don't even know what his title was. And he's very respectful. She puts on the regular construction hat that all the workers wear because she doesn't want them feeling uncomfortable around her. And Mr. Zahn comes in, and I think the new girlfriend, and they're just like being complete jerks. There's a whole lot of slapping in the scene, this general scene. And then Henry Wood shows up. There's slapping involved with him. Nobody's believing who she is. You discover she's actually like this really powerful architect who's supposed to be like a genius, sort of, in architecture. And then like it goes on, and like there's some sort of party to present her further. Again, still disbelief, but Henry absolutely sticks with her, even though it's just kind of funny. And I think his family is there. I can't even, like, the details are fading, but it was just a very fun drama. At the very end, they're together. Her ex-husband has his comeuppance and has been left by that woman who took up with some other guy. I can't remember who it was. And just a lot of fun. Very quick to watch, like movie length. And yeah, it was good. It was different. But again, I do love my regular length dramas, and I do love the daily dramas, which these are kind of like, but they're even more kind of not jump the shark, but they're wild. Like they're that whole construction area scene where there was so much slapping. That would I've never actually seen that in a regular K-drama to that extent. So it was fun. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the spectrum of stuff that I had to talk about today. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at erikatalksdramas@gmail.com. That's ERIKATalksdramas@gmail.com. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good night. Two additional things. I realized that Mark Hamill's character in The Long Walk is actually called the Major, not the General. Silly mix up. And also, I realized that I kind of hinted that I was going to talk about the big reveal in Stormy Marriage and then forgot to give the big reveal. So it turns out, as you might have guessed from the description anyway, Henry Wood and Anna Kurt were supposed to marry each other anyway. And with all this mistaken identity stuff, there was an imposter. She had an illegitimate cousin, I think, who tried to pretend like she was the heiress. There was all kinds of stuff, but it turned out that they were meant for each other anyway. And that was fine because he stuck by her all along, even though they didn't really interact except for these conversations where they aren't believing each other, but they're defending each other against everybody else. So, anyway, I just thought I would add that. So, thank you for listening. See you next time.
Erica talks K dramas, C dramas, T dramas, HK dramas.
Erica talks K-dramas, J-dramas, Turkish dramas, Thai dramas, but mostly K-dramas. Erica talks Egyptian dramas, Indian dramas, telenovelas, but mostly K-dramas. Do 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 do.